HubSpot. Perhaps the most important marketing company ever. They invented inbound marketing and reached a $42 billion market cap. But they might also be the weirdest company ever. A candy wall, massage therapists, nerf gun battles, bouncy-ball office chairs, a room packed with writers they call the Content Factory. And now their market cap has collapsed by 79%. What happened to the most important company in marketing? Despite HubSpot still growing and still making money, everyone seems to be waiting for it to die. Do you notice how every company has blogs now? Kinda weird, right? Why does, say, a shoe company have a blog section and a newsletter? That's largely because of HubSpot. Before content marketing and social media, marketing was more abrupt. Worse, I'm not really sure, but it sure was annoying. Commercials during TV and movies, radio advertisements, billboards dominated public spaces, spam emails filled inboxes. And the worst, telemarketers. Calls during dinner, during the day, marketing felt really abrupt and something done at you. Two MIT graduates, Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Shah, noticed the same thing, but from the seller side, buyers had learned to tune everything out. So in 2006, they built HubSpot to help small businesses solve this. What if marketing worked in reverse? What if customers came looking for the company? In the early 2000s, people started using search engines and blogs to research products for themselves. You collect information on your own terms, and the blogs were a huge part of this. HubSpot built a toolbox for turning strangers on the internet into paying customers. Their strategy is simple. First, publish content that answers questions, rank on Google with good SEO, convert the readers into buyers or even fans. With this, they coined the term inbound marketing and wrote the literal book on it in 2010. But that was just the beginning. They built an entire toolbox for marketers. One of its earliest tools was Website Grader. Businesses could enter their website and get a free report showing SEO issues, performance problems, and ways to improve. This being free back in the day was unheard of. Just between 2006 and 2011, it graded more than 4 million websites. With Twitter Grader, they took it a step further. Customers shared their Twitter scores to their followers, who became inspired to do the same, generating tons of awareness for HubSpot. The thing about HubSpot was that they practiced what they preached. HubSpot's blog was the company's growth engine and the proof of concept. Thousands and thousands of HubSpot blogs. A blog could pull in 100,000 visitors, which can retain 2,000 subscribers to 100 qualified leads, even for a blog post written years ago. Free tools and hundreds, then thousands of blogs. HubSpot became the cultural center of online marketing. But there's one question. If all this stuff is free, how did they make any money? Ads? Well, surprisingly no. The blogs and free tools were the content marketing that brought customers into their paid services. CRM, marketing tools, sales tools, and service hubs priced per seat and by tier. It's a simple idea you see with so many marketing funnels for SEO companies or SaaS companies. Give away a bit of real value for free, draw the customer into the paid content, and it worked, big time. After launching in 2007, HubSpot generated $255,000 in revenue in just its first year. 3 years later, it had multiplied that figure by 61, reaching $15.6 million. That kind of growth attracted major investors, including Sequoia Capital and Google. Ironically, years later, Google's own decisions would become HubSpot's biggest problems. But for now, things were taking off, and this was just the beginning. After years of launching free products, HubSpot went public in 2014 at $25 per share, raising $133.7 million. Most companies slow down after an IPO. HubSpot's system helped it expand more. In 2016, HubSpot generated $271 million in revenue. 3 years later, that figure had more than doubled to $675 million, with over 73,000 customers. Then, COVID accelerated everything. Companies that were late to the online game suddenly had no choice, which created a huge demand for digital marketing and sales tools. HubSpot's customer base jumped 39% in a single year, reaching nearly 96,000 customers. By 2021, revenue had crossed 1.28 billion. Then, in 2024, revenue had doubled to 2.63 billion from almost 248,000 customers. It's kind of crazy how dominant HubSpot was. Revenue grew more than 10,000-fold from 2007 to 2024, while its customer base expanded nearly 20 times after the IPO. Growth rarely fell below 20% for years and years. HubSpot was the gem of the marketing world, but it had two major problems that didn't seem like problems on the inside. The first actually relates to one of its first investors, Google, who ironically would become responsible for its downfall. But second was much stranger, HubSpot's very weird culture. On the outside, HubSpot was professional, the marketing standard, if a bit quirky and fun. Inside was one of the weirdest company cultures in history. Back in April 2013, Dan Lyons started his first day at HubSpot. A journalist at 50 years old with a wife and two young children, he suddenly found himself unemployed. HubSpot, a fast-growing tech startup, had offered him a stack of stock options for a vaguely defined role called Marketing Fellow. And his experience was so strange and so wild, he wrote an entire book about it, Disrupted, which many of the following quotes come from. This book would send HubSpot's leadership into a panic, even causing the FBI to get involved. I've spent the past decade writing satire about the technology industry, but nothing I ever dreamed up in those fictional accounts could compare to the ridiculousness I encountered when I took a job at an actual tech company, a software maker called HubSpot. The offices bear a striking resemblance to the Montessori preschool that my kids attended. Lots of bright basic colors, plenty of toys, and a nap room with a hammock and soothing palm tree murals on the wall. The office as playground trend started at Google, but now has spread like an infection across the tech industry. Work can't just be work. Work has to be fun. HubSpot is divided into neighborhoods, each named after a section of Boston: North End, South End, Charlestown. One neighborhood has a set of musical instruments, in case people want to have an impromptu jam session, which Zach says never happens. The instruments just sit there. HubSpot embraced every tech startup cliche imaginable. A candy wall, a game room, bouncy-ball desk chairs, a noon push-up club in the lobby, nerf gun wars. Teams go on outings to play trampoline dodgeball and race go-karts and play laser tag. Odd, though some people like that kind of culture, but we're just getting started. Friday parties starting at 4:30 rage into the night. Shower pods that became hookup dens. I hear a story about janitors coming in one Saturday morning to find the following things in the first floor men's room: a bunch of half-empty beers, a huge pool of vomit. The janitors were not happy. They get even more distressed when one morning, a 20-something guy from the HubSpot marketing department arrives wasted and, for reasons unknown, sets a janitor's cart on fire. But maybe that's just some bad actors, though HubSpot's approach to everything, including content and their staff, is quite off-putting. Everyone works in vast open spaces, crammed next to one another like seamstresses in Bangladeshi shirt factories. Only, instead of being hunched over sewing machines, they're hunched over laptops. Zach takes me to a cramped little shoebox of a room, about 15 feet wide and 30 feet long, where 20 young women are packed into 2 rows staring at laptops. This is the content factory. That is literally what they call it. Things get even weirder. A co-founder bringing a teddy bear to meetings to represent the customer. All-nighters to churn out blog posts were branded as content hackathons. A seating hack policy by which employees swap seats every 3 months. If an employee is fired, the company disguises it as a graduation. Zach points to an empty desk. "I guess you can sit there," he says. Instead of a chair, there is a big rubber ball, orange of course, on a rolling frame. I'm not quite sure what to do. If I ask for a chair, I risk looking like an old fart who doesn't know how to sit on a bouncy ball. Also didn't help Lyons that the CEO of HubSpot, Brian Halligan, said, "In the tech world, gray hair and experience are really overrated," while Lyons, who very much had gray hair, was working there. I don't know if you guys have seen Parks and Rec, but this reminds me of the fictional telecom company Grizzle, a parody of absurd startup culture, but sometimes reality is crazier than fiction. Some call this lifestyle branding, where companies use culture and aesthetic as a substitute for traditional compensation or job security. This was the kind of company that called the office a family, while underneath all that fun were young workers hanging on low salaries, distracted by all the fun benefits. HubSpotters were true believers. They were making the world a better place by selling email spam. While all of this was happening, HubSpot was simultaneously winning Best Place to Work awards. Am I saying no one liked working there? Of course not. But it certainly is weird looking back in retrospect. One man's cult is another's dream job, I guess. Lyons quit after about 2 years and wrote his book, Disrupted. Yet, before it's even published, HubSpot finds out, and things turn pretty dark. To HubSpot, this was a huge threat to its share price and its image. Executives consider the book a financial threat to HubSpot, its share price, and the company's future potential. There were multiple attempts to obtain the manuscript through email hacking, extortion, and efforts to gather sensitive information on people connected to the book. These were allegedly so aggressive, the hacking and extortion, that the FBI launched an investigation. HubSpot then fired its chief marketing officer, Mike Volpe, after an internal investigation concluded that he had violated the company's code of ethics. HubSpot Vice President of Content Joe Chernov also resigned. According to the company, Volpe had been involved in efforts to obtain an unpublished manuscript of the book. Even Brian Halligan, the founder and CEO, was caught up in this. He was even sanctioned for knowing about the book and failing to inform the board in time. I didn't know if someone was breaking into my house or hacking my computers. I didn't know what happened. It got so bad that he filed an FOIA report with the FBI to find out what had been done to him, only to receive heavily redacted pages in return. Ironically, parts of the book may have even helped recruiting by portraying HubSpot as a place where work was at least fun, because everyone already knew about the absurdity of startup culture. But Dan Lyons would soon become the least of HubSpot's concerns. Years later, a much bigger force would disrupt HubSpot's entire business model, one that invested in HubSpot many years ago. The world of business, marketing, and tech is continuously changing. Companies rise and fall all the time, with some pretty crazy stories. We cover these every week, so if you haven't, subscribe so you don't miss future videos. In September 2021, HubSpot stock closed at an all-time high of $852 per share. From its $25 IPO price, that was a 34x return. HubSpot was now a $40 billion company. It looked unstoppable, but then the slow leak began. In January 2023, HubSpot announced its first layoffs in company history. On the same day, HubSpot closed some office spaces and concentrated employees into one main location to save money and operate more efficiently. But the real problem wasn't inside HubSpot, it was coming from Google. In April 2024, Google explored a $35 billion acquisition of HubSpot. This would be Alphabet's largest acquisition ever, with many reports of progress through May. But then, on July 10, 2024, this fell through with no explanation. This sent HubSpot stock down by 19%, its worst since 2020. Why did Google back out? During this period, HubSpot was growing faster than Google, reporting revenue growth of more than 20% for 6 consecutive quarters, while Alphabet had not exceeded 20% growth since early 2022. So, why? We don't really know, but we have a pretty good guess. At the time, Google was already fighting a long battle over monopolizing search engine and search advertising markets. So trying to also claim a huge part of CRM software, the acquisition would have faced all kinds of antitrust blockades. It just wasn't worth the hassle. But from here, things went from bad to worse for HubSpot. Way worse. In 2024, Google launched AI overviews. Traffic to many blogs fell off a cliff, and HubSpot was among the most affected. Users no longer clicked on blogs like HubSpot's. They simply asked AI for the answer, and at most glanced at the sources it cited. HubSpot's monthly traffic fell from 13.5 million visits in November 2024 to 8.6 million in December alone. Nearly 5 million visits disappeared in a single month. Zoom out further, and the decline looks even worse. In March 2023, HubSpot's blog attracted 24.4 million monthly visits. By January 2025, that figure had fallen to just 6.1 million. In less than 2 years, as much as 75 to 80% of its traffic had vanished. Before, a CRM company could rank for famous quotes, resignation letters, and cover letter templates to generate traffic. But Google's AI-powered search is increasingly rewarding expertise. When a website tries to rank for everything, it becomes harder for Google to determine what the site actually specializes in, making it less likely to appear as a trusted source. None of these had much to do with the software it actually sold. This flooded the algorithm. The volume strategy, or rather, the content factory, was backfiring. After being a content factory for almost 2 decades, they quietly deleted more than 30,000 blog posts. They later admitted the strategy had been showing cracks as far back as 2020, and it gets even worse. In 2026, the rise of AI raised doubts across the software market, especially in SaaS. But HubSpot beat expectations with its new AI integration. Revenue grew 23% to 881 million, customers approached 300,000, and management even raised its forecast. With those numbers, it unveiled its survival bet, outcome-based AI pricing, where customers pay only when an AI agent successfully resolves a ticket, alongside price cuts and free trials. The market ignored HubSpot's long history of free tools and saw something else: desperation. The stock fell 19% the next day. Today, HubSpot is worth roughly 11 to 12 billion, down from nearly 40 billion at its peak. The strange thing is that HubSpot hasn't collapsed. Revenue is still growing. Reportedly, AI agents are now resolving around 70% of support tickets across 9,000 activated customers. Among AI-generated answers, HubSpot is actually the most recommended brand in its category. And most importantly, they're actually making a profit now. Yet, despite all that, their market cap is the lowest it's been in 6 years. The market is still judging what AI might do to every SaaS company, including HubSpot. Even if HubSpot has pivoted, AI is hugely disrupting SEO, blogs, and seat-based SaaS companies. HubSpot does all of these. Investors aren't convinced HubSpot's best days are still ahead of it. It's not just HubSpot though. The entire world of SaaS seems to be collapsing. Another case is Monday.com, who seem to have an ad on every YouTube video. They spent more on marketing than they had in revenue, but now they're crumbling. Click here to learn the rest of the story, but until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.